The year was 1809, and in a one-room log cabin in the wilderness of Kentucky, a child was born who would reshape the destiny of an entire nation. This wasn't just any ordinary birth in frontier America. This was the beginning of a story so extraordinary that it would take a man from the humblest beginnings imaginable to the highest office in the land, where he would face the greatest crisis in American history. Abraham Lincoln entered this world on February 12th, surrounded by nothing but rough-hewn logs, dirt floors, and the endless expanse of untamed wilderness. His father, Thomas, was a simple farmer, barely able to scratch out a living from the unforgiving Kentucky soil. His mother, Nancy, was a woman of quiet strength who could neither read nor write, yet she possessed something far more valuable than education. She had an unshakable belief that her son could become something greater than the circumstances of his birth. But here's what most people don't realize about Lincoln's childhood. It wasn't just poor, it was desperately, crushingly difficult in ways that would break most people before they even reached adulthood. The Lincoln family moved constantly, always searching for better land, better opportunities, better hope. From Kentucky to Indiana, they carried their few possessions and their dreams across rivers and through forests that seemed determined to swallow them whole. When Abraham was just 7 years old, the family settled in Indiana, where they faced challenges that would test every fiber of their being. The winters were brutal, with temperatures that could kill the unprepared. Food was scarce, and young Abraham often went to bed with an empty stomach, listening to the howling wind through the gaps in their cabin walls. Disease was a constant companion in these frontier settlements, striking without warning and claiming lives with ruthless efficiency. Then, tragedy struck the Lincoln household in the most devastating way possible. When Abraham was only 9 years old, his mother, Nancy, succumbed to what frontier families called milk sickness, a mysterious illness that swept through their community like wildfire. In a matter of days, the woman who had been the cornerstone of their small family was gone, leaving behind a heartbroken husband and 2 children who suddenly found themselves adrift in an unforgiving world. The loss of his mother would haunt Abraham Lincoln for the rest of his life, but it also forged something unbreakable within him. He watched his father struggle to hold their family together, and he made a promise to himself that he would never let circumstances define his destiny. While other children his age were playing games and learning trades, Abraham was teaching himself to read by the flickering light of their fireplace, using whatever books he could find or borrow. His hunger for knowledge was insatiable, almost desperate in its intensity. He would walk miles to borrow a single book, then read it cover to cover multiple times until he had memorized entire passages. The Bible, Pilgrim's Progress, Aesop's Fables, and eventually the speeches of great orators became his teachers when no formal education was available. Every word he absorbed was like fuel for a fire that burned brighter with each passing year. But Abraham Lincoln's transformation from backwoods farm boy to future president wasn't just about books and self-education. It was about developing a character that could withstand the pressures that would eventually reshape an entire nation. The hardships of frontier life were teaching him lessons that no classroom could provide. He was learning about perseverance, about integrity, about the value of hard work, and most importantly, about the fundamental dignity of every human being, regardless of their station in life. This foundation would prove absolutely crucial when he faced the greatest challenge any American president had ever encountered. As Lincoln grew into his teenage years, something remarkable began to happen that would set him apart from every other young man on the frontier. While his peers were content to follow the well-worn paths of their fathers, becoming farmers, blacksmiths, or traders, Abraham possessed an almost supernatural ability to see beyond the limitations of his circumstances. He began to understand that words had power, that ideas could move mountains, and that a single person with the right combination of conviction and skill could change the course of history. His first real taste of the wider world came when he was 19 years old and took a flatboat journey down the Mississippi River to New Orleans. This wasn't just a simple trading expedition. This was Lincoln's first exposure to a world that existed far beyond the confines of rural Indiana, and what he witnessed there would plant seeds that would grow into the defining principles of his presidency decades later. In the bustling port city of New Orleans, he saw something that shook him to his core. Human beings being bought and sold like livestock in the slave markets, the sight of families being torn apart, of children being separated from their parents, of human dignity being stripped away for profit, left an indelible mark on Lincoln's consciousness. He watched in horror as auctioneers called out prices for human lives, and he made a vow that would echo through the corridors of American history. Years later, his traveling companion on that journey would recall Lincoln saying that if he ever got the chance, he would hit slavery as hard as he could. As Lincoln matured into manhood, every hardship he had endured, every book he had devoured by candlelight, every moment of suffering and triumph was preparing him for a destiny he could never have imagined as a barefoot boy splitting rails in the Indiana wilderness. The rail splitter would become a lawyer, then a congressman, and finally, the 16th President of the United States, arriving at the White House just as the nation was tearing itself apart over the very issue that had haunted him since that fateful journey to New Orleans. When Lincoln stepped onto the battlefield at Gettysburg in November 1863 to deliver what would become the most famous speech in American history, he carried with him every lesson learned in that one-room log cabin. The boy who had lost his mother to frontier disease, who had educated himself by firelight, who had witnessed the horrors of slavery firsthand, now stood before a nation divided and spoke words that would echo through eternity. In just 2 minutes and 10 sentences, he transformed a battlefield dedication into a redefinition of American democracy itself. The journey from that humble log cabin in Kentucky to the hallowed ground of Gettysburg proves something profound about the American experiment. It demonstrates that greatness isn't determined by the circumstances of your birth, but by the choices you make when faced with impossible odds. Lincoln's story reminds us that the most ordinary beginnings can produce the most extraordinary outcomes, and that sometimes the person who changes the world is the one who refuses to accept that the world cannot be changed. From log cabin to Gettysburg, Abraham Lincoln didn't just rise above his circumstances. He transformed them into the very foundation upon which he would save a nation and redefine what it means to be free.